My straight roommate got jealous when I went on a date. Then he finally told me why. Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you enjoy emotional gay love stories with romance, powerful twists, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing viewers from all over the world. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive into today's story. Who are you dressing up for? Mason asked, and the question stopped me with one hand still on my collar. I looked at him through the bathroom mirror. He stood in the doorway wearing the faded gray hoodie he usually lived in on Friday nights, one shoulder resting against the frame, a coffee mug balanced in his hand, even though it was almost 7. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, his face calm enough to fool anyone who had not lived with him for nearly 2 years. I have a date, I said. Mason stopped lifting the mug toward his mouth. It lasted maybe a second, but I noticed. A date? Yes, Mason. Those still exist. I turned back toward the mirror and adjusted my navy shirt. I had changed twice already, which felt embarrassing considering Luke and I were only meeting at a casual Italian place in Lincoln Park. Who is he? Mason asked. I glanced at him again. Luke. Luke what? Are you planning to run a background check? I am making conversation. You are making very specific conversation. His mouth almost curved into a smile, but it disappeared. Outside our 6th-floor Chicago apartment, tires whispered across pavement, still wet from an afternoon shower. Somewhere below, a car horn sounded. The air conditioner hummed behind us. Mason looked at my shirt. You look nice. 3 harmless words. I hated how easily they affected me. Thanks. I picked up my watch from the counter and fastened it around my wrist. Where did you meet him? Online. How long have you been talking? 2 weeks. And you are already meeting him? I turned around fully. Mason, what exactly is happening right now? His eyebrows lifted. Nothing. You have asked more questions about Luke. In 30 seconds than you asked about my new job during my entire first week. That is not true. It is close enough. He looked down into his coffee. I should have left it there. I should have grabbed my jacket and gone downstairs. Instead, I studied him because there had been a time when I studied everything Mason did. I had learned to stop. Mason dated women. He had always dated women. Whatever existed between us belonged safely inside friendship, and I had spent a long time teaching myself not to turn ordinary kindness into evidence of something more. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Luke had arrived early and was waiting near the restaurant. I picked it up. That is him? Mason asked. Yes. I walked toward the front door and reached for my jacket. Mason followed me into the living room. What time will you be back? My hand stopped on the doorknob. I looked over my shoulder. Why? For the first time that evening, Mason had no immediate answer. His fingers tightened around the mug. Just wondering. I nodded, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway. The elevator was 20 feet away, but I could still feel his eyes on me before the apartment door closed. I told myself not to make something out of nothing. I had spent nearly 2 years convincing myself that Mason could never want me. That Friday night was the first time I wondered whether he had been trying to convince himself too. The elevator doors closed, and I immediately told myself I was imagining things. It was safer that way. By the time I reached the lobby, I had returned to the rule that had kept my friendship with Mason uncomplicated for almost 2 years. Never mistake kindness for love. Mason and I had not started as best friends. We had started as 2 guys connected by a mutual friend and the shared realization that Chicago rent was easier with a roommate. I expected separate groceries, polite conversations, and arguments about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom. Instead, our lives slowly folded into each other. Mason learned that I needed vanilla creamer in my coffee before I could function in the morning. I learned that he called his mother every Sunday and always. Spent 10 minutes afterward complaining that she asked too many questions. When I stayed late at the design firm, I sometimes came home to find dinner waiting in the refrigerator. When Mason had engineering deadlines, I brought him coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen counter while he complained about project details I barely understood. Tuesday became takeout night. Sunday became movie night. If we started a television series together, neither of us was allowed to watch the next episode alone. We never made those rules. They simply appeared. About 6 months after moving in, I realized I had fallen for him. There was no dramatic confession waiting inside that realization. Mason was standing in our kitchen after midnight, making grilled cheese because I had skipped dinner, and he laughed at something stupid I said. I remember the refrigerator light catching the side of his face. I remember thinking that coming home felt different when he was there. Then I remembered everything else. Mason dated women. He had talked about girlfriends from college. During our first year as roommates, he dated a woman named Rachel for several months. I met her twice. She was smart, funny, and kind, which made it impossible to turn her into the villain I secretly wanted. So I gave myself rules. Mason remembering my coffee meant friendship. Mason saving me the last slice of pizza meant friendship. Mason texting when I worked late meant friendship. Mason waiting to watch a movie with me meant friendship. Eventually, I became good at believing myself. Good enough to download a dating app again. Good enough to answer Luke Carter when he messaged me. Good enough to say yes when he asked me to dinner. My phone buzzed as I stepped outside the building into the cool evening air. Luke had sent a message saying our table was ready. A rideshare waited at the curb. I reached for the back door, then glanced up toward our sixth-floor apartment without knowing why. Mason stood behind the living room window. Even from the sidewalk, I recognized him. He was looking down at me. The moment he realized I had seen him, he stepped away from the glass. I got into the car and closed the door. As we pulled into traffic, I repeated the rule that had protected me for nearly 2 years. Kindness was not love. I knew that. What I did not know was whether jealousy could still be called friendship. Luke was already waiting when I reached the restaurant in Lincoln Park, sitting near the window beneath a row of warm amber lights. He looked exactly like his pictures, which felt like a small victory after everything people warned you about online dating. Sandy brown hair, an easy smile, and the kind of relaxed expression that made me feel less nervous the moment he stood to greet me. "Caleb," he asked. "Luke." "Good." We both found the right stranger. I laughed and sat across from him. Within 15 minutes, conversation stopped feeling like a first date. Luke taught history at a Chicago high school, loved old movies, and had opinions about deep dish pizza strong enough to qualify as a personality trait. We talked about work, rent, family holidays, and the strange pressure of trying to seem interesting while eating pasta in front of someone you had only known through a phone screen. For almost an hour, I forgot about Mason. Then my phone buzzed beside my plate. I glanced down. "Mason, hope dinner is going well." 5 harmless words. I stared at them longer than I should have. "Everything okay?" Luke asked. "Yes, my roommate." I turned the phone face down. Luke smiled slightly. "The roommate you mentioned earlier?" I frowned. "I mentioned Mason? Twice." I felt my face warm. "That is embarrassing." "Not necessarily." Luke did not push. He simply asked me about my latest design project, and I was grateful for the escape. By the time we finished dinner, the rain had stopped and the sidewalks reflected the city lights. Luke walked with me toward the corner where my rideshare was meeting me. "I had a good time," he said. There was no hesitation, no hidden meaning. "So did I. Would you want to do this again?" I looked at him and realized how easy the question was. "Yes, I would." He smiled. My car arrived a minute later, and I spent most of the ride home thinking about how different clarity felt from hope. When I entered the apartment close to midnight, the living room lamp was still on. Mason sat on the couch with the television playing quietly. "You are still awake?" I asked. "I was watching something." I glanced at the screen. It was a documentary about commercial fishing. Mason hated boats. "How was dinner?" he asked. I took off my jacket. "Good. Just good. Really good, actually." His thumb stopped moving over the television remote. "Are you seeing him again?" "Probably." Mason nodded once and looked at the screen. I started toward the kitchen. "Caleb." I turned around. He was watching me again. "What?" Mason hesitated. His fingers tightened around the remote. "Did he kiss you?" For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. "What did you just ask?" His eyes shifted away from mine. "Forget it." "No, you do not get to ask me that, and then say forget it." Mason stood slowly. "It was only a question." "Then why do you need the answer?" Silence. The television filled it with the distant sound of ocean waves. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he walked toward the hallway. "Good night, Caleb." His bedroom door closed a few seconds later. I remained beside the couch, staring at the empty hallway. Luke had spent an entire evening making his interest easy to understand. Mason had needed one question to make everything uncertain again. The next morning, Mason behaved as if he had never asked me whether Luke kissed me. That should have made things easier. Instead, It made every ordinary thing feel suspicious. I walked into the kitchen around 8 and found my usual coffee waiting beside the machine, already softened with exactly the amount of vanilla creamer I liked. Mason stood at the counter in a gray t-shirt, checking something on his phone. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I picked up the mug and waited for an explanation. None came. By Monday, I had almost convinced myself to let the question go. Then Luke texted while Mason and I were eating takeout at the kitchen counter. My phone lit up beside my plate. Luke Carter. Mason saw the name. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Only for a second. Then he kept eating. "Luke?" he asked. "Yes." "What does he want?" I looked at him. Maybe he needs help understanding the Louisiana Purchase. Mason gave me a flat look. "Very funny." He asked whether I am free Saturday. Mason set his fork down. "Another date?" "Probably." "That seems fast." I laughed once. "We had dinner, Mason. We are not buying a house together. I am just saying you barely know him. That is why I am seeing him again." Mason nodded, but something in the room had changed. Tuesday gave me another clue. Luke sent me a picture of a ridiculous drawing one of his students had made of him as Abraham Lincoln with enormous eyebrows. I laughed while sitting on the couch. Mason looked up from his engineering plans on the laptop. "What?" "Luke sent me something." Mason's eyes returned to the screen. Of course he did. I lowered my phone. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." Wednesday evening, I came home from the design firm and found 2 plates of pasta on the kitchen counter. For 20 minutes, we were ourselves again. Mason complained about a project meeting that had lasted nearly 3 hours. I told him a client had requested a complete redesign and then asked why the original design had changed. He laughed. I laughed. The apartment felt normal. Then my phone buzzed. Mason's smile disappeared before I even reached for it. "Luke?" he asked. I left the phone where it was. "Why does his name bother you?" "It does not." "You keep saying that." "Because it is true." "Then stop acting differently every time he texts me." Mason leaned back slightly. The refrigerator hummed behind him. Traffic moved 6 floors below. "I just do not know the guy." "Neither do you need to. I do not want you getting invested in someone who might not be right for you." I stared at him. "And somehow you know what is right for me." His eyes met mine. For 1 second, all the excuses disappeared from his face. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a sentence he was terrified to finish. Then he glanced down at his plate. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up and opened Luke's message. "Saturday dinner?" I typed yes. When I looked back, Mason was watching my hand around the phone. I had spent almost 2 years learning not to confuse friendship with love. What nobody had taught me was how to recognize the moment friendship started looking afraid of losing me. By Saturday evening, I was tired of pretending Mason's questions were harmless. I came out of my bedroom around 6:30 wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater and found him sitting at the kitchen counter with his laptop open in front of him. The screen showed an engineering drawing, but his eyes moved to me the second I entered the room. "Going somewhere?" he asked. I stopped. "You know I am." Mason closed the laptop. "Right. Dinner with Luke." "Yes." I reached for my coat. He stood and carried an empty coffee mug to the sink. "Where are you going?" "Wicker Park." "What restaurant?" I turned toward him. "Why?" "I am making conversation." "No. You are collecting information." His jaw tightened slightly. "I just think you should slow down. This is our second date." "Exactly." I stared at him. "Exactly what, Mason?" He rubbed one hand across his jaw and looked toward the window. Chicago was turning blue beyond the glass, the last daylight fading between the buildings. "You barely know him." "You have said that 3 times this week." "Because it is true, and I am trying to know him. That is what dating is." Mason said nothing. I put my coat over my arm. "Do you actually like him?" he asked. The question was quieter now. No sarcasm. No excuse. "Maybe I do." His eyes returned to mine. "Maybe. I have been on 1 date with him. I am allowed to figure it out." Then why rush? Something inside me finally became clear. I was not angry because Mason cared. I was angry because he wanted the privileges of caring without accepting what those privileges meant. "Then tell me why you care so much." "Because you are my friend." Friends care. Friends do not monitor every message, question every plan, and wait until midnight to ask whether somebody kissed me. Mason looked down. "I was not monitoring you." "Then what were you doing?" He had no answer. I stepped closer, but left several feet between us. "You cannot keep acting like my boyfriend whenever another man wants to be." Mason's head lifted. For 1 second, the entire apartment seemed to go silent. Even the traffic below felt distant. His expression changed, and what I saw there was not anger. It was fear. "I know," he said. "I almost missed it." "Do you?" "Yes." My heartbeat quickened. "Then what is this?" Mason closed his eyes briefly. "I am trying to understand something." "What?" "Something I thought I already understood about myself." The words landed harder than anything he had said all week. My phone buzzed inside my pocket, probably Luke telling me he was on his way. I ignored it. "Mason, what are you trying to tell me?" He looked directly at me, and I could see the answer fighting with every instinct he had to keep it hidden. His lips parted. Nothing came. I waited. Still nothing. Finally, I picked up my coat. "Luke does not make me guess whether I am allowed to believe what I see." Mason swallowed. "Caleb." I opened the door and looked back. He stood alone beside the kitchen counter, his laptop forgotten behind him. "I am sorry," he said quietly. I stepped into the hallway. As the door closed, I understood something that frightened me more than his jealousy ever had. Mason was not only hiding an answer from me, he might still be trying to hide it from himself. Luke was waiting outside the restaurant when I arrived in Wicker Park, and one look at my face made him raise an eyebrow. "You look like you just had an argument." I tried to smile. "Is it that obvious? You have been staring at the same parking meter for 10 seconds. I laughed despite myself, and some of the tension finally left my shoulders. We went inside, where warm lights reflected against exposed brick walls and conversations blended with the quiet sound of dishes from the kitchen. Luke did not ask what had happened. He simply gave me room to be there. We talked about his students, my latest design project, and an old movie we had both watched more times than either of us wanted to admit. After a while, the argument with Mason began to fade into the background. Luke leaned closer across the table as he finished telling me a story about one of his students, and I laughed harder than I expected. For the first time that evening, I stopped thinking about Mason. Then something beyond Luke's shoulder caught my attention. Through the restaurant window, beneath the glow of the streetlights, someone stood completely still. Mason. My smile disappeared. He was staring through the glass at Luke and me. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Shock crossed Mason's face first. Then his jaw tightened, and his eyes shifted toward Luke, who was still leaning toward me across the table. There it was. The emotion Mason had spent the entire week denying. Jealousy. Our eyes met through the glass. Mason looked away almost immediately, as if being caught watching us was worse than whatever had brought him to Wicker Park in the first place. Then he turned and walked away. "Caleb." Luke's voice pulled me back. I looked at him. "What? You just disappeared for a second." I glanced toward the window again. Mason was gone. "Sorry," I said. "I thought I saw someone." Luke followed my eyes toward the sidewalk, but did not ask who. I tried to return to our conversation, but something had changed. Until that moment, Mason's jealousy had existed in questions, silences, and unfinished sentences. Now I had seen it on his face. I tried to return my attention to Luke, but he had already noticed the change in me. He studied my face for a moment before setting down his glass. That was him, wasn't it? My fingers stopped beside my plate. "Who?" "Your roommate." I looked toward the window again. The sidewalk was empty now. "How did you know?" "Because you looked at that window like the person standing outside mattered more than everything happening inside." I did not know what to say. Luke leaned back slightly. There was no anger in his expression, only understanding. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Is there someone else?" "There is no relationship, if that's what you mean." That wasn't exactly what I asked. I looked down at my hands. "There is someone I've cared about for a long time," I admitted. I convinced myself it could never be anything more than friendship. "Mason." I let out a quiet, embarrassed laugh. Apparently I talk about him too much. A little. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Luke glanced toward the window. He didn't look like a roommate. Watching his friend have dinner. My heartbeat quickened. What did he look like? Luke gave me a small smile. Like a man who had just realized somebody else might get there before he did. The words hit harder than I expected. I thought about Mason standing outside the glass. The way his eyes had moved from Luke to me. The tension in his jaw. The expression he had been trying to hide all week. "He's always dated women," I said quietly. He told me he was straight. Maybe he believed that. I looked at Luke. "And maybe he still has things to figure out," Luke continued. "But whatever he's feeling, I don't think you imagined what you just saw." That was exactly what frightened me. For nearly 2 years, I had survived by convincing myself that every look, every late-night conversation, every cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning meant nothing beyond friendship. Now Mason had stood outside a restaurant and looked at me as if watching me with someone else hurt. Luke reached for his glass. "You don't owe me an explanation tonight, Caleb, but I'm going to ask you for one thing." "What?" "Don't make me compete with someone who doesn't even know there's a competition." I swallowed. "That's fair." Luke smiled, but there was something bittersweet behind it. We finished dinner without pretending the conversation had not happened. And when I finally left the restaurant, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Mason had spent an entire week telling me he wasn't jealous. Tonight, I had finally seen the truth for myself. It was after 11 when I opened the apartment door. The living room was dark, but a single light glowed above the kitchen counter. Mason stood beneath it with a glass of water in his hand. He looked up the moment I entered. "Caleb." I closed the door behind me and put my keys down. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I looked directly at him. "Were you at the restaurant tonight?" Mason's fingers tightened around the glass. He did not ask what I meant. That was answer enough. "I saw you," I said. His eyes dropped toward the counter. "I know. Why were you there?" Mason took a slow breath. "I went for a walk. All the way to Wicker Park." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "I know how that sounds. You knew which restaurant I was going to." "I did. Because you asked me before I left." "I know." I stared at him. "So you followed me?" His head lifted immediately. "No. I wasn't planning to go inside. I wasn't planning to confront you or Luke. He stopped. "You just what?" Mason looked toward the window. "I couldn't sit here wondering." "Wondering about what?" He swallowed. "What the two of you looked like together." The honesty of the answer caught me off guard. "And?" Mason's jaw tightened. "I hated it." My heartbeat changed. "You hated Luke?" "No." "Then what did you hate?" He finally looked at me. "Seeing you with him." The apartment seemed to become completely still. I stepped closer to the kitchen. "Why?" Mason looked down at the glass in his hands. "That's what I've been trying to understand." "No." His eyes returned to mine. I shook my head. "You don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to question every message he sends me. Ask whether he kissed me, tell me I'm moving too fast, and then stand outside a restaurant watching us because you don't understand." His face tightened. "I know. Luke saw you." Mason froze. "He knew immediately who you were." "How?" "Because of the way you were looking at us." Mason said nothing. I stepped closer. "He told me you didn't look like a roommate watching his friend have dinner." Something shifted in Mason's expression. "What did I look like?" I held his gaze. "Jealous." The words stayed between us. This time, Mason did not deny it. He set the glass down slowly. I was. My breath caught. It was the first time he had said it without an excuse. "Then tell me why." Mason rubbed one hand across his jaw. "Before you, I never questioned certain things about myself. I never thought I needed to. And now I keep thinking about why watching another man make you laugh felt like somebody was taking something away from me." I stared at him. "I'm not something you own, Mason." "I know." "Then what are you afraid of losing?" His eyes met mine. "You." The answer came so quietly that for a second I thought I had imagined it. Mason continued before I could speak. "I spent my whole life thinking certain things about myself were settled. Who I dated, who I was attracted to, what I wanted. Then you came into my life, and somehow I never questioned any of it, because you were just you. Your roommate. My best friend." He paused. "And maybe that's the excuse I've been hiding behind." My heartbeat was loud enough that I could hear it. "Mason, what are you trying to tell me?" He took a step toward me, then stopped, leaving space between us. "I'm trying to tell you that when I saw you sitting across from Luke tonight, I wasn't worried that he might hurt you." His voice dropped. "I was afraid he might make you happy." I felt the words hit somewhere deep in my chest. "Do you hear how unfair that is?" "Yes. Luke actually knows what he wants." "I know. He doesn't make me guess." "I know. Then what do you want?" Mason opened his mouth. For one second, I thought this would finally be the moment. But fear returned to his expression. "I don't know how to say it yet." The hope rising inside me collapsed just as quickly. I stepped back. "Then I can't keep doing this." "Caleb, no. I have spent almost 2 years convincing myself that everything between us was friendship because you told me that's what it was. I can't suddenly build something out of jealousy and unfinished sentences." His eyes lowered. "I'm trying. And I believe you." I took a breath. "But I can't stand still while you decide what I mean to you." Mason was silent. I'm going to keep living my life, I said. And if that means seeing Luke again, then that's what I'm going to do. He nodded slowly. It hurt more than I expected. I turned toward the hallway. Caleb, I stopped. There is one thing I know. I looked back. Mason stood beneath the kitchen light, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. Whatever this is, you can't solve it for me. I swallowed. Then don't ask me to wait while you solve it. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. For the first time, Mason had admitted that he was jealous. But jealousy was not enough. If he wanted me, eventually he was going to have to say it. For the next 4 days, Mason and I became experts at being polite. We said good morning. We discussed groceries. We reminded each other about the electric bill. We talked about work, traffic, weather, and every harmless subject that allowed us to avoid the conversation waiting underneath all of them. What disappeared were the small things that had once made our apartment feel like home. No late-night movies. No coffee waiting beside the machine. No messages asking when I would be back from the design firm. And Mason never mentioned Luke. Not once. That silence should have made things easier. Instead, it made me realize how much space Mason had occupied in my life even before either of us understood what was happening. On Thursday afternoon, Luke invited me to a fundraiser his school was holding at a restaurant near Lakeview. My first instinct was to say no. Then I remembered what I had told Mason. I could not stop living my life while he searched for an answer. So I went. Luke met me outside beneath strings of warm patio lights. You came, he said. I said I would. People say a lot of things. I smiled. I'm trying to become someone who means them. He studied me for a moment. How are things with Mason? Quiet. Good quiet or terrible quiet? Definitely the second one. Luke smiled but did not push. Inside, the restaurant was crowded with teachers, parents, and enough conversation to keep my thoughts occupied. Luke introduced me to coworkers. We joined a trivia team. I laughed at stories about his students and spent 10 minutes defending a movie everyone else at the table apparently hated. For almost 2 hours, I barely thought about Mason. And for the first time, that did not make me feel guilty. Maybe moving forward did not begin when you stopped caring about someone. Maybe it began when you stopped arranging your life around the possibility that they might someday choose you. Luke walked outside with me afterward. The summer air was warm, and traffic moved steadily along the street. I had fun tonight, I said. So did I. He hesitated. Can I be honest? Please. I like you, Caleb. The simplicity of the statement almost hurt. I like you too. But, I looked down. The street. But part of me is still somewhere else. Mason. I nodded. Luke slipped his hands into his pockets. Then eventually you're going to have to decide whether you're waiting for him or moving on. I told him I wasn't going to wait. That's not what I asked. I looked at Luke. He gave me a sympathetic smile. Sometimes not waiting and actually letting go are two different things. Before I could answer, my rideshare pulled toward the curb. Luke opened the rear door for me. Good night, Caleb. Good night. About 20 minutes later, the car stopped outside my building. Mason was standing near the entrance with a grocery bag in one hand. His eyes moved toward the car. For a moment, I saw the same emotion I had seen through the restaurant window 4 nights earlier. But this time, Mason did not interrogate me. He did not ask where we had gone. He did not ask whether Luke had kissed me. He simply looked at me. Good night, Caleb. Luke called from inside the car. Good night, Luke. The car pulled away. Mason lowered his eyes to the grocery bag. That was him. It was not really a question. Yes. Mason nodded. We entered the building together. Inside the elevator, silence followed us past the 3rd floor. Then Mason spoke. I owe you an apology. I looked at him. For what? For the restaurant. The elevator continued upward. I shouldn't have gone there. Whatever I was feeling didn't give me the right to follow you. I had not expected that. Thank you. And you were right about something else. What? His eyes stayed on the changing floor numbers. Jealousy doesn't give me a claim on you. The elevator doors opened. Neither of us moved for a second. Then Mason stepped into the hallway. When we reached the apartment, he placed the grocery bag on the kitchen counter. I started unpacking it. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee, vanilla creamer. My hand stopped around the bottle. Even after 4 days of barely speaking, Mason had remembered. You still bought this. He looked at the bottle. You still live here. I almost smiled. Then Mason became serious again. I've been thinking about what you said. Which part? That I have to figure out what you mean to. Me. I put the creamer down. And He took a slow breath. I kept asking myself why seeing you with Luke hurt. I waited, and I finally realized I was asking the wrong question. What was the right one? Mason looked directly at me. Why did I need to lose you before I was willing to admit how important you already were? My heartbeat quickened. Mason. He shook his head gently. Let me finish. I stayed silent. I thought Luke was the problem because everything changed when he showed up. He paused. But Luke didn't create any of this. His eyes stayed on mine. He just made it impossible for me to keep pretending it wasn't already there. For once, Mason did not look away. And for once, I did not help him finish the thought. If there was more, he would have to come to me with the words himself. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Mason stood across the kitchen counter from me, his expression more open than I had ever seen it. Then he looked down at his hands. There is more. I stayed where I was. Then say it. He took a slow breath. I've spent the last 4 days trying to separate what I feel from what I was afraid of losing. I said nothing. At first, I thought this was about Luke. I thought I was reacting because someone new had entered your life, and everything between us suddenly felt different. His eyes lifted to mine. But that's not true. My heartbeat quickened. Luke didn't change how I feel about you. He only forced me to look at something I had been avoiding for a long time. What were you avoiding? Mason hesitated, but this time he did not look away. You. The word landed quietly between us. Not Luke. Not the idea of losing my roommate. Not being afraid the apartment would change. He stepped around the kitchen counter but stopped several feet away from me. You. I could barely breathe. Mason, let me finish. Please. I nodded. He rubbed his palms against his jeans, nervous in a way I had almost never seen from him. I kept thinking about all the reasons you matter to me. The coffee in the morning. Tuesday takeout. Sunday movies. You sitting across from me while I complain about work. You texting me something stupid in the middle of the day because you know it'll make me laugh. His voice softened, and I realized those aren't the reasons I feel this way. I frowned slightly. They're just the life we built while I was too afraid to understand why it meant so much to me. My chest tightened. Mason, you've always dated women. I know. You've spent almost 2 years telling me you're straight. I know. Then I need you to understand why I'm scared to believe this. I do. No. I need you to really understand. I stepped closer. I've wanted you before, Mason. For a long time. And I taught myself not to. I can't undo all of that because you got jealous when another man took me to dinner. His expression tightened, but he nodded. You're right. Then tell me something that isn't about Luke. Mason went completely still. I waited. This was the moment I had refused to create for him. No hints. No unfinished sentences. No jealousy he could hide behind. Just the truth. Mason stepped closer. When something good happens at work, you're the first person I want to tell. Another step. When something goes wrong, you're the person I want to come home to. My throat tightened. When you're gone, this apartment feels different. He was close enough now that neither of us needed to raise our voices. And when I imagine you moving out someday, building a life somewhere else, waking up beside someone else. He stopped. I could see fear in his eyes. But this time, he kept going. I don't hate that because I'm jealous. His voice dropped. I hate it because I want that life with you. I forgot how to breathe. Mason's eyes searched mine. I don't have the perfect label for myself yet. Maybe I won't for a while. But I don't need a label to know this. Know what? His answer came without hesitation. I want you, Caleb. For nearly 2 years, I had imagined those words in more versions than I could remember. None of them felt like this. I swallowed. Do you want me because I'm standing here, or because you're afraid I might choose somebody else? Mason shook his head. If you chose Luke tomorrow, I'd have to respect it. The answer hurt and comforted me at the same time. But it wouldn't. Change what I'm telling you now. He moved one step closer. I was jealous because I already wanted you. I just didn't understand that until I was forced to see what losing the chance might feel like. I searched his face for uncertainty, for panic, for some sign that he would take the words back tomorrow. I found none. When you finally stopped asking yourself what you were supposed to feel, I said quietly, what was the answer? Mason looked directly into my eyes. You. Silence filled the kitchen. Not the painful silence we had lived inside for the past week. Something different. Something that finally had nowhere left to hide. Mason's eyes dropped briefly toward my lips before returning to mine. He did not move closer. Caleb, I knew what he was asking without him finishing. But after everything we had been through, I wanted one thing between us to be completely clear. Are you asking if you can kiss me? A nervous smile touched his mouth. Yes. I stepped closer until only inches remained between us. Then asked. Mason's breath caught. Can I kiss you? I held his gaze. Yes. He leaned toward me slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind. I didn't. His lips met mine gently. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Then I reached for the front of his shirt and kissed him back. There was no urgency to it. No need to prove anything. The kiss was soft, careful, almost disbelieving, as if both of us understood how long it had taken to cross the few inches between us. When we finally separated, Mason stayed close. His forehead rested lightly against mine. Okay, he whispered. I couldn't stop a small laugh. Okay. I've been trying to figure out what that would feel like for longer than I'd like to admit. And his eyes opened. I definitely wasn't imagining that. I laughed again, and this time Mason did too. Then his expression became serious. I don't want one kiss to make promises I'm not ready to keep. The honesty surprised me. Good. He looked confused. Good. I don't need you to wake up tomorrow with every answer. I stepped back slightly. But I do need you to wake up tomorrow and still mean what you said tonight. Mason nodded. I will. I studied him. And we're not suddenly boyfriends because we kissed. I know. You still have things to figure out. I know. And I need time to trust that this isn't just fear of losing me. You should. That answer mattered. Mason wasn't asking me to rescue him from uncertainty anymore. He was asking for the chance to be honest inside it. For nearly 2 years, I had dreamed about Mason finally wanting me. Standing there in our kitchen after our first kiss, I realized wanting each other wasn't the ending. It was simply the first time both of us were brave enough to begin. Mason and I did not become a couple that night. And strangely, neither of us needed to. After our first kiss, we moved to the couch and talked until nearly 3 in the morning. Not about Luke. Not about jealousy. About us. About the 2 years we had spent building a life together without realizing how much of it had already begun to feel like something more. Mason told me he had started questioning his feelings months before my first date with Luke. He had ignored it because friendship felt safe. Losing me had simply made ignoring it impossible. I wish I'd understood sooner, he said. I looked at him across the couch. I don't. He frowned. Why? Because if you'd told me before you were ready, I would have spent every day wondering whether you meant it. Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Fair. The next morning felt almost ridiculously normal. Sunlight filled the kitchen. Mason made coffee too strong. I added enough vanilla creamer to make him look personally offended. But when he handed me my mug, his fingers brushed mine, and neither of us pretended not to notice. There was no dramatic announcement. No instant relationship. No promise that one kiss had answered every question Mason still had about himself. What we had instead was honesty. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Later that afternoon, I called Luke. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hey, do you have a minute? Of course. I took a breath. I owe you an honest answer. There was a brief silence. Mason, I laughed softly despite myself. Am I really that obvious? Caleb, you talked about him on our first date, right? Luke laughed. Then his voice softened. Did he finally figure it out? He's trying to, but he told me how he feels. And how do you feel? I looked toward the kitchen. Mason stood at the counter pretending not to listen. The same way I felt for a long time. Luke was quiet for a moment. Then I think you already know what you need to do. I'm sorry. Don't be. I liked you, but I'd rather hear the truth now than become the person you date while wishing I were somebody else. The kindness in his voice made the conversation harder, not easier. You deserve someone who's completely there, I said. So do you. Before we hung up, Luke added one more thing. Just make sure Mason understands that choosing you means choosing you when nobody is competing for you. I looked toward the kitchen again. Mason met my eyes. I think he's starting to. The next several weeks were quieter than the week that had changed everything. Mason did not suddenly become a different person. He still forgot to replace the paper towels. He still made coffee stronger than any reasonable human being needed. We still argued about movies. But the uncertainty between us began to change. Sometimes we sat closer during Sunday movies. Sometimes his hand found mine on the couch. Sometimes he kissed me before bed and then smiled afterward like he was still surprised he was allowed to. But Mason never used those moments as a shortcut around the questions he still needed to answer for himself. He talked to people he trusted. He stopped treating uncertainty like something shameful. And he never asked me to define him. Most importantly, he never asked me to wait. We were moving forward. Slowly. Honestly. Together. About 6 weeks after our first kiss, I came home from work on a Friday evening and found Mason standing outside my bedroom door. For a second, the sight took me back to the night everything had started. Only this time, he was the one dressed up. Dark blue shirt, black jeans, clean shoes, and his hair had clearly received more attention than usual. I stopped in the hallway. "Who are you dressing up for?" Mason stared at me for half a second. Then he laughed. "You've been waiting 6 weeks to use that against me, haven't you?" "Absolutely." He shook his head. Then the nervousness returned. "Actually, I'm dressing up for you." My smile faded into something softer. "Why?" "Because I want to take you to dinner." "As roommates?" "No." "As friends?" "No." He stepped closer. "As a date, Caleb." My heart stumbled once. A real one. A real one. There was no jealousy in his expression now. No Luke. No competition. No fear that somebody else might get there first. Just Mason. "I've spent 6 weeks making sure I'm not asking because I'm afraid of losing you," he said. And his eyes held mine. "I'm asking because I want to choose you." That was the answer I had been waiting for. "Where are we going?" "Lincoln Park." I stared at him. "Seriously? I thought we could rewrite one memory." I reached for my jacket. "Then you're paying." I expected that. We walked toward the elevator together. Just before the doors opened, Mason reached for my hand. This time, there was no hesitation. I intertwined my fingers with his. For almost 2 years, I had believed my feelings were the secret between us. I had been wrong. The real secret had been fear. Fear of changing a friendship. Fear of questioning something you thought you understood about yourself. Fear of saying what you wanted before you knew whether the other person wanted it too. Luke had not created Mason's feelings. He had simply forced Mason to stop looking away from them. And Mason's jealousy had not been the thing that made us fall in love. It had only been the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. The elevator doors opened. Mason looked at me. "Ready?" I squeezed his hand. "Yeah." And for the first time since this whole thing began, neither of us had to guess what the other one meant.